Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dion Brown. You are watching and or listening to Man versus Brand. Now, I kind of want to talk to you guys about something because I think that this is near and dear to my heart. For the folks who don't believe I have a heart, I do, and it is made of solid gold. Now, what I want to talk about is the fact that we often, when we think of innovation, when we think of creating a new opportunity, I think many of us believe that the spaces that are available to us are found in tech, that are found in virtual currency, that many of the commerce players have already figured it out. Many of the home and consumer goods folks have figured it out. But I want to talk about a space that may actually provide some really great opportunities if you know how to maneuver them. Now, I'm going to be honest and say that I don't know how to maneuver them. But that's not the point of Man versus Brand. The point of Man versus Brand is to find other people who have figured out how to maneuver things that I have not figured out, that you guys might have not figured out, and to bring them into the conversation and hopefully learn more about what it is. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the creation, production, proliferation, and making profit, right? Because that's the whole goal of a business, from games, from board games and outdoor games. And I think what's beautiful about this specific form of business, this industry, is that one, I grew up in a world where I feel like Hasbro did everything. I feel like I grew up in a world that was very much you had like Chutes and Ladders, the Doctor game, the Game of Life, and then every character, or for lack of a better term, every playable action figure or game related to an action figure was also made by a cartoon that was also made by this kind of giant production machine, right? And so this idea that one could come up with something and monetize it specifically in the board game, outdoor game category seemed like it would have been a stretch. Enter the idea of social media, crowdfunding, people being able to really advocate for and grow a community around what they're doing. I think D&D is a really great example of some folks that have been able to just create community and create products around that community and self-fund out those things and make them profitable. Right now we have these chances where if you have a really good idea, then you may want to take a stab at seeing that idea through. So to talk to us about how they completely failed at this, I'm just kidding. That's not what we're going to talk about here. All right. To talk about the process of what it took for these two guys to become players in the outdoor board game. All right. I'm going to be cheesy this whole episode. It started with the y'all shirt, guys. You didn't see it. It was off camera, but I think it awoke something very funny, but also very corny in me. All right. So I have Tim Swindle. I have Scott Brown. They're going to talk first about themselves and kind of where they are, and then we're going to ask some questions, and they're going to field those questions based on where I think the conversation is going. So let's start with you, Scott. Scott, why don't you introduce yourself and how did you get to be in the outdoor board game field?
What's going on, Dion? Nice to meet you. Glad to be on the show. And yeah, so it's funny when people find out what I do. So I tell them I make games for a living. The first question they always ask is, oh, like video games. And it's a funny thing that's our kind of knee-jerk reaction nowadays, is to assume it's video games. The physical board game industry is still huge. It's a $13 billion industry. It's growing, or at least holding steady. In the ebbs and flows of the economy, it always does well. And so it's a great industry to be in. But how I ended up in it is kind of a bizarre and fun story. The quick and dirty version of it is that I got hired by a group in Chicago to be an entrepreneur in residence. And what that means essentially is they were like, we've got some money, we've got an office, and we want to give you some of our money if we like ideas you come up with. So come in, use our office space, use some of our expertise, and pitch us ideas. It was like a Shark Tank almost every day, where you'd come to the office and your job was to come up with an idea and pitch it to this group of potential investors, and they may or may not decide to give you a little capital to try it out. And so we were constantly pitching ideas. And one day we came up with this idea of a brain health store. So a store where you could go in and work out your brain. It would be like a gym for your brain. And they were like, well, there's something interesting there, but I don't know if a gym is what people will spend their money on. Like, are there good products that people would buy? And we actually had come across all this great stuff in the process of looking at the gym concept. We decided to aggregate it all together, and we launched a store in downtown Chicago in the fall of 2008. We called it Marbles the Brain Store. You can see that right there, my old logo. And it was actually like almost out of the gate a pretty big success. Like people came in, they got what we were trying to do. People were looking for ways to keep their brains sharp. But what happened, which was interesting, was we didn't know what people would want to buy in our stores. We were selling pedometers, we were selling supplements, we were selling brain health software, and we were also selling toys and games that were brain healthy. And kind of over the course of the first few months in business, we found that everyone was buying the toys and games. That's what resonated. That's what people wanted to do day in and day out. It's like, God, when I go to work out, I don't like running on a treadmill because it is just, I know that I'm working out my body every second I'm on a treadmill. And I like to fake my brain out a little bit. I like to play pickleball because I don't know I'm working out. Well, it's the same way with your brain. So we had this brain health store. People wanted toys and games to work out the brain. So we opened that first store. And then over the course of the next 10 years, we opened another 40 stores. So we had 40 stores across the US under this brand, and a healthy and thriving e-com business as well. So we were always on the lookout for up and coming ideas. It was a little bit like, we were almost like a Shark Tank or a Kickstarter in the retail world, where we would look for new ideas and we would give them a retail shelf space to launch their brand. And that's actually how I met Tim. So I'll hand it over to Tim for a second to tell his part of the story.
Well, no, hold. There's some things.
I was trying to do your job.
Easy. But no, there's some questions that I have in your book. First of all, what's your alternative to running on a treadmill?
Pickleball. Yeah, do you know pickleball?
No.
All right. Well, by the end of this podcast, you'll know pickleball. I'm going to talk a lot about pickleball.
No, I do, because I did the research. But you're supposed to do it. So
I'll do a little bit. Yeah. So
pickleball.
For those that don't know, honestly, it feels to me, and it's because I'm tuned into it, but I could barely open a news article these days without seeing pickleball. There was an article today in the Washington Post about pickleball. Last week in the New York Times. It's everywhere now. This is the fastest growing sport in North America. The best way to think about it is it's like a miniature version of tennis. And it takes some of the best elements of tennis and eliminates some of the worst elements. I grew up playing tennis, but I barely play anymore because I think most of tennis is waiting around for someone to get a serve in. And it's this massive court, and it's hard to find someone that is at your skill level to play. Well, pickleball solves a lot of that because it levels the playing field. It's an underhand serve, so almost every serve goes in. The game's not about the serve. And really, it's a game about brains more than brawn. And so you can be very good at this game and be in your 80s. I mean, honestly, I'll go and play every morning, and I'm playing against 70 and 80-year-olds who can kick my butt because they are smart about how they play. It's a lot less about the physical kind of know-how, and it's the mental know-how that wins. And so I love pickleball. it for me is a good physical workout and a good mental workout. So that's a little context for where we're about to go with the podcast.
Cool. Or at least we think we are.
Maybe a little teaser.
Now, so pickleball, squash, handball. Give me one. Which one do you choose?
If I had to choose, pickleball hands down.
Really?
Yeah, hands down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, cool. Okay.
It's like a community now. I mean, every park near me has a pickleball court now, and it's pick up pickleball. I don't know another sport that's quite like this. I guess basketball can be like this, where you'll just show up at the park and you could just join a game. Well, that's how pickleball is built. You show up, you put your paddle on a paddle wall, and you are next up in line as soon as the game ends. And you just rotate in, and you get to know people. It's a beautiful community.
Where do you live? What part? Where?
I live just outside of Salt Lake City in a town called Alpine.
Got it. Okay. All right. I'm going to look up pickleball in New York.
Yeah.
One other thing that I had a question about is you said that you were an entrepreneur in residence, right?
That's it.
Okay. So each week you're pitching, and then you mentioned like a plural version. You're like, we were pitching. So were there more entrepreneurs in residence other than you?
Yeah, that's right. There were about 20 of us.
Tank, basically.
It's like a think tank. Yeah, we were basically told, go and find pain points. Identify pain points out in the world, and then bring it to the table, and we'll brainstorm ideas of how to solve those pain points.
Got it. All right, cool. That's an awesome story, man. All right, to you, Tim Swindle. Let's talk, man. Tell me about your life.
Well, how much time do we got?
Tell me about your life, and I want to know how many pickleball places are in your local area.
So let me answer your other question. So I'm actually not as big of a pickleball player as Scott is, and I love squash.
Okay.
And so it's just another flavor for you. I really enjoy squash, but I am getting into pickleball. I get the craze. It is a ton of fun. So my story, I was a software entrepreneur. I was building this sales software company. It was venture backed, burning a ton of capital, running big teams. It was not fun. And as a passion project, as a side hustle, I'd read an article. Let me start there. I'd read an article in Inc. magazine, and it talked about how a game called Cards Against Humanity had come to fruition. For those that don't know, Cards Against Humanity is just a really popular kind of adult R-rated board game. And it was really popular and very successful. And they also happen to be from Chicago, so I kind of like that angle. That's where I lived at the time. And so anyway, I read this article and it got me thinking. I was like, I actually have a game that we've been playing up at friends' lake houses late at night on the weekends and whatnot when we've run out of things to talk about. And we created a game that I think I could take and I could kind of follow the blueprint that I saw in this article of how to create a board game and bring it to market.
Yep.
And so I did that. And again, full-time job as building a software company, decided to do a very low tech, board game on the side at nights and weekends. And it ended up, I did a Kickstarter. It didn't like blow up on Kickstarter. It wasn't one of these like ones that you see that do millions of dollars. I like barely hit our funding goal of $15,000, but it got our first win and it got us out there. And so that actually happened to be when I met Scott, and he through a mutual connection that I had from growing up, met Scott, who was the co-founder of Marbles, the Brain Store. And he loved the idea of my game, and he ended up becoming the first retailer to carry my board game. And so that's how we got to know each other. My game ended up shortly after, got picked up by Target and Walmart and some other bigger players. And ultimately, I went on to sell both the software company and this board game company. Meanwhile, Scott had gone on and sold his retail business to a publicly traded Canadian toy and game company. And we built a friendship, I'd say, through the business relationship, and had always talked about wanting to work together. And so, here we are launching our newest thing together.
All right, cool. So So what was the name of the game in which you, Tim, met Scott?
It's called Utter Nonsense. And
Utter nonsense.
Utter nonsense.
I'm trying to do the voices.
Oh, yeah. Utter nonsense. Yes.
Yeah, utter nonsense, yes. Right? Like, right? So,
yeah.
I usually before doing an episode will look at the idea that the person had and then pitch it to my friends and colleagues who are also entrepreneurs or executives or whatever, just regular cool ass people. And I'm like, what would you think about this? Right. And to be fair, a lot of people were really, really surprised that they hadn't played the game and then promised to get the game for our next time together. They're like, oh my God, that sounds so much fun. I need that game. So I imagine you got about 6 more sales because you know how like people are, they're just like, give me the name. How do you spell that again? Is it utter like a cow or is it, it was like one of those things, right? And so folks are really, really excited, which then in part made me really excited. Now, let's go back into pickleball. Right, let's talk about it for a second. Now that we know a little bit about you, Scott, know a little bit about you, Tim. And I actually am a handball guy, but I think that might be because I'm from New York. We don't have very much room, so they just build a wall and put 2 spaces behind it, and they just go, right? And so there's not very much space for anything else. So talk to me about why outdoor game as opposed to continuing along the board game route, or are you paralleling the 2 concepts? Like, are you doing a board game and you're working on an outdoor game, or is this outdoor game the focus?
I think we've always got a little something cooking, kind of a variety of projects, but I will say that this is my primary focus, and Tim's as well, that we're really zeroed in on this as our business. Why outdoor? That category is the fastest growing category in toys and games. Why is it the fastest growing? I think there's a few reasons. One, I think COVID helped. I think people were looking for things to do at home or in their own backyard. Kind of affordable and portable and kind of things that you could do with immediate friends and family. And that caused a big, huge spike in the industry. There's also been a few big successes that have caught people's attention. One would be Spikeball. For those not familiar, it's hard to drive past a park in my area without seeing people out playing Spikeball, especially teenagers. It's like a round net and you're using your hand to kind of bump, set, and spike the ball back into the net. You're working with a teammate against 2 other players. So that thing has been the fastest growing outdoor game over the last 10 years. I was aware of it because, number one, he was based in Chicago, the founder. And number 2, my stores were one of the very first to launch his product. And so we watched the growth of Spikeball in my stores and just saw that explosion. And so I was tuned into that. I saw that growth. I saw the opportunity in the category, and then I saw pickleball. As we've talked about, it's the fastest growing sport in North America, and I just felt like there was such an opportunity there. And what often happens in the toy and game world is that it just feels like there's something in the ether. Like all of a sudden, all the inventors that are pitching to me all come with a very similar concept, and it's not because they're copying each other. It's that suddenly kind of the worlds start to merge and form new things. And that's what happened here. I was brainstorming ideas with Tim, trying to come up with what our next thing was. And we were like, oh, we see the growth of pickleball. What can we do that's kind of like that? And we started to sketch ideas out. And almost that same week, I was introduced to an inventor named Joe Bingham. And Joe pitched me a concept, and his idea was almost identical to our idea. But he had it farther along. He had spent 2 years refining his concept. And I just looked at Tim and I was like, Tim, I think we've got our idea. I think we've got our next project. This guy's already done all of the work to get it to a good spot. So we ended up partnering with Joe. We licensed the idea from him. and we created this game. There's a cool backstory on how Joe created that, but that's kind of how we decided to go after this this category.
All right, cool. So when you play, so I did my research, right? So I did my research on pickleball just to understand it a bit more. What actually, because I didn't really see this clearly defined for me, what makes this more accessible than tennis? Because I from what I understand, is that to your earlier point, Scott, that there is a wider range of individuals that can play it, from a sort of rule standpoint. I think outside of the point system seems to be sort of similar to tennis. Is it the size of the space that you're occupying? Is it what makes it easier on the body? Because a lot of what I've heard is just that it's a really healthy way of engaging in a sport like tennis without a lot of the rigor that tennis creates.
I think you've touched on the biggest reasons. The court's about half the size of a tennis court, so there's just less need to kind of run long distances. That's not to say it's not good physical exercise. It is, but it's more contained. And so especially kind of older adults are able to play. I've got people I play with that had just had knee surgery, that had just had, back surgery, and they're still able to get out there because so much of the game happens right at the net. There's a line called the non-volley line, and there's an area called the kitchen. So all these kind of funky terms in pickleball, but there's an area called the kitchen. And you're not allowed to step into that kitchen when you're taking a volley out of the air. What that does, it keeps the play really contained. Players kind of are rushing up to that non-volley line, and then most of the play happens within that small contained space. And so instead of with tennis, you're kind of going back and forth along the baseline, these big swooping ground strokes that, most older adults can't keep up with. Well, this one keeps the play contained. And then the other I already touched on, the serve is a big change, where almost every serve goes in pickleball because it's underhand and you're not trying to serve aggressively. You're basically just trying to get in. You're not given a let in pickleball. And so it's higher risk to serve hard because if you miss, you lose the point or the possession. And so you're very incentivized to hit a controlled shot in, which means that almost every serve goes in and almost every play is in play. So I'd say those are the two biggest reasons why it's taking off and why it's more accessible.
I feel like this episode would have been more interesting if you guys were on a pickleball court and we could watch you play. And as you scored a point, I'd ask you a question, you'd run over and you'd run back and hit it again.
We could do that as a follow-up episode. I like it.
Cool. All right, Tim.
We have the outfits if you want to do that.
We do. We have some.
Hey, picklers. Hey, picklers. All right, Tim, question for you, right? So, do you think that this idea and the proliferation of the idea is sort of what's happening in outdoor games in general? You see this kind of return to like shuffleboard type games, or where people are throwing the sacks into cornhole type games. There's like the ring toss on the hook game, right? Like there's sort of these very kind of simplified, really fun, easy games that are now starting to just be more readily available when you're in outdoor spaces. There was a time where like these games weren't really there. And now you start to see these kind of simplified, more sort of fun, and I think with shorter learning curve games being played in community outdoors. So do you see that as maybe a part of the trend of what's happening?
Very much so. And so one of the early partners that we have is a company called Chicken and Pickle. And this concept is exactly what you're describing. I think you see with, let's say, like Top Golf, that exploding. It's this idea where you're going out, you want to have entertainment, but it's more physical. You're doing something versus going and sitting and watching a movie or just going to dinner. And there's a term called entertainment. And so you're seeing these concepts popping up all over the place where you're going out, having drinks, eating, doing something. And so with a lot of the games that you just described, I think one of the beauties of them is that they're not too intense, right? So you can go, you can eat something and you can maybe have some cocktails while you're either playing it or right after you're playing it. Actually, with this chicken and pickleball concept that we're starting to work with, so they have like 9 locations. They're exploding. They're mostly like in the Texas, Kansas, like southeast or southwest, excuse me. But you'll see there's copycats of them popping up all over the place. And we were talking to the gentleman that runs the one that was in San Antonio, Texas, that we were visiting. And he said that by far the most popular night that they have that just blows it out is the beer in hand night. And it's where you have to play pickleball with a beer in your hand. And I found that fascinating. And it's just, I think, but that's the draw, is that you're going out and you're doing something physical while also eating and drinking and having a good time. And so,
aside from the eating and drinking part, I mean, I think as you're talking, like archery for me falls in that category. Hatchet throwing,
the axe throwing, right?
Axe throwing, right? Like there's starting to become this sort of want for people to participate in very simple games that you can do that that are complex in a way, but that are complex in a way that challenges them physically, specifically in a world where, specifically, I think in a COVID world where so many individuals have been stationary for the better part of 2 years. And even in a space where a movie was available, I think the general gist of the world is let's go outside and do something, right? Like, I don't even know what it is. I just know that I think being indoors is triggering for some folks right now still, right? And so they're like, let's go out and let's do something. Now, let me follow up with you, Tim, on this idea, because when we're talking about the idea of space and places opening, how does something like pickleball work for the places that I grew up, been to, loved, right? LA, New York, Miami, Boston, DC. Is because in those places there's not a lot of space, right? Like space is there's just not a ton of it, right? Is it to petition and work with this idea that each of those cities are having for green space, and then bringing that into their green space idea? Because a lot of cities are now sort of pushing the idea of having green space. Is it something that you would imagine working near waterfronts where there tends to be space, but maybe it's not usable just because a business couldn't be built there? How do you see this concept working in spaces where, something like even a miniaturized tennis court is still, in the right hands, a $40 million building, right? Where that becomes a determination. How do you see this working in those sorts of spaces?
Well, I'll answer that in two parts. So for pickleball specifically, we are seeing that, one, they're turning a lot of tennis courts into pickleball courts. So I think you have just excess inventory out there of pickleball courts that go of tennis courts that go unused. Okay. And so now they're repurposing them as pickleball courts. You're also seeing the developers. The developers are realizing that there's money to be made here. And so they are now building out these amenity-rich buildings where they're offering pickleball courts. And they like them because they're a lot smaller square footage that they need versus tennis courts. And that was one of the articles that I think came out in the New York Times in recent weeks, was how that's like the new trendy amenity that a lot of the developers building big apartment buildings and whatnot are wanting to offer to their people. For us specifically, so with PaddleSmash, our game, it's this hybrid of pickleball and spikeball. And one of the benefits is that it's portable. So, there is still this big pain point with pickleball in particular, of that it's not available everywhere. So with a lot of those cities you just described, like, I'm sure it does exist because it is that popular right now, but like, that was one of Joe Bingham's initial issues, was that like the pickleball courts, they're 20 minutes away. And when you go to them, they're always crowded. And so that was the pain that he felt as a father of 7 kids and wanting to play with his kids in their backyard. But he can't afford what it costs to build a pickleball court at $40,000 or whatever. And so with our game, PaddleSmash, it basically allows you to set up shop wherever you want. You don't need that much space. You bring to the beach, bring to the backyard, bring to a park, wherever you have space. You can play our game, PaddleSmash, which gives you that flavor of pickleball. It's not pickleball, but it gives you that flavor of it to kind of scratch the itch if it's what you want to do.
You know what, you guys, I'm just gonna sit back because you got all my transitions. Right before I'm going to transition, I'm like pickleball just seems like it's a lot of space, but there has to be a solution to it. Scott, what's the solution? But you're like, Tim, I'm gonna answer that before. All right, so PaddleSmash. Scott, take it away. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, so PaddleSmash, as Tim touched on, it's just a marriage of 2 really great games. It's a funny thing. People wonder sometimes if there's any new games to be created. You even touched on this in your intro. You wonder sometimes if there's anything left to be invented. And maybe the answer is that there are no new ingredients, but there's a rearranging of the ingredients always available. And that's what we did. We've rearranged ingredients and created a new, and what I think is kind of amazing concept, an amazing result. So the great thing about Spikeball is it's very physically active, but I'd say the downside is that it's very physically active. And so adults and dads, especially moms especially, can't play with their kids in Spikeball. You're diving around, you're jumping for the ball. It's really hard to keep the ball contained, at least for really short rallies. And we thought, is there a better way to make it so points last longer and so that it plays across a broad range of ages? And so it's one of the things that Joe, the inventor, was addressing with his game. He couldn't keep up with his kids in Spikeball, and he thought, all right, I'm going to make my own thing. He's a structural engineer. He started gluing components together, and over 2 years, he was testing this with his family and with friends. The end result, and I'm sure you're going to send a link to your listeners, but if I'm going to try and paint a picture, there is a hexagonal base that sits on the ground. It's a hard plastic base. And then there's a net system that extends up the sides of this base. And then every player, we find it best played 2 versus 2, but you can play it with 3 or just 1 versus 1. But in the 2 versus 2 version of the game, you're standing on opposite sides of the court from your teammate. So imagine the 3 of us plus one other person playing this game, okay? So Dion, you're my teammate. Tim, he's teammates with Brian over here. And Dion, I'm going to serve the ball to you. And the way I serve is I hit the ball down into the court and it pops up out of the court and over to you. We then, as teammates, have up to 3 hits to get the ball back into the court. It's like volleyball, the bump, set, spike. We call it bump, set, smash. So within 3 hits, we have to get the ball back into the court. An illegal hit has to hit the base and then bounce up over the net. And so then once we've done that successfully, the other team has up to 3 hits to get it back into the court. And you're kind of roaming around the outside of this net system, going back and forth with your teammate, setting them up and trying to get a good enough smash that the ball goes into an area where the other team can't get it. If the ball at any point hits the ground before the other person hits it, the other team hits it, well, then your team wins the point. And it's as simple as that. It's a very quick and easy game to learn how to play. And really, we say it takes about 5 minutes to get into the groove of this game. And once you get into it, kind of you got it. And so, yeah, that's the essence of PaddleSmash. It's just pickleball meets Spikeball.
All right, so I'm going to give some sense of scale. All right, so if a tennis court is about 80 feet long, right? Yeah, right, and pickleball court is 50-ish. feet long-ish, then this is something that when you erect it, you're looking at about what, like 4 or 5 feet, if that.
The game itself only takes up that much space. You need a little bit more space to play.
Sure.
I'd say like at a minimum, you probably need about 15 feet to play.
Sure. What I'm saying is in scale, when we're talking about the size of the court goes from 78, 80 to about 40 to about 5, right? So this becomes something that really moves from really just being an outdoor game to being sort of a portable game that can be used in a backyard, at a beach, at a park, at like an outdoor party. This is the same type of fun that might be included when people are thinking of like giant Jenga and things like that. So there's something that is very much accessible for like social gatherings that are happening where maybe you don't have 40 or 70, and not to say anything's wrong with not having that much space, but where you may not have 70 or 40 feet of space, but you still want to have an engaging time with a few of your friends.
I mean, that's it. And I didn't touch on that, so thanks for hitting on it. But the game is very portable. The base folds in half like a suitcase, and all of the components store inside. And it's very lightweight, so it's easy for you to carry it to the beach, to the backyard, to a party. And it's a very social game. The games play to 11. They're very quick. Most games on average last about 5 minutes. And so you're able to play with a large group of people, even beyond the 4, and just have people rotate in. I played it just last week with a group of teenage kids, and there were 6 others sitting outside. So number one, it's fun to watch, but number 2, 5-minute games, we were just constantly rotating new players in. So it's a game where you could very easily play this at social gatherings. And it's not like tennis, where a tennis match can last 3-4 hours. Even a pickleball match can last 20, 30 minutes. This is like 5-minute games, just quick and easy. You're just cruising through games and rotating people in.
All right, cool. I want to talk to Tim and then to you about working partnership. That's a part of this episode. It's going to be about how it is to work together. But I do have a question. Tim, I'm going to ask it to you. Does buoyancy matter? Not buoyancy, maybe buoyancy. I think I'm going to use the term buoyancy. Does it matter what sort of surface the court is laid on, like the PaddleSmash court is laid on? Is it like better on grass, not really great on sand, versus being on maybe like turf or street? Or is it going to give you pretty much a similar sort of return in terms of the bounce anytime?
So good question. We say that grass, is probably the preferred placement for the game, but I mean, certainly beach also works really well. We've played it on hard surfaces. I think in our experience, like the difference in the bounce is just very slight. I mean, the game that we created, the base of it, what we call the court, it has this pretty intense plastic webbing system that it does just absorb the bounce really nicely, regardless of the surface that you set it on. And I'd say the biggest requirement is just a flat surface. That's probably the main thing. I mean, but as far as where we played it on all of those. I think they all work really well. If I had to pick my favorite, it's probably grass, because there is the element of like if you really want to get a little more intense with it, like you like to dive around, where if you're doing that on the street or whatever, like you probably hurt yourself. So grass and sand are a ton of fun.
All right, cool. So let me talk to you about working partnerships, right? Because partnerships start in various different forms, right? Some people partner with their spouses. Some people partner and meet in college and sort of work their way through, right? And this one, it feels as if you had produced your game, Utter Nonsense, or were in the production of it. You, through a mutual friend, met Scott, and then now you guys are working together on PaddleSmash, right? And so, so do you guys like Is it like a think tank? Are you guys like throwing together ideas, putting them on the board, figuring it out? Are you delegating certain parts of the business and then collaborating on other elements together? Like how does the partnership work? And I to be fair, I don't know if I'm speaking to two of more partners or silent partners, whatever. I'm just going to talk about your relationship, right? Like how does the partnership work so that you both are inputting and you're also working toward your individual strengths and your collective purpose?
Yeah. So for, I don't know. We don't have time to air all my dirty laundry, but
No, you do.
With utter nonsense. I did have a partner originally, and he was a friend first, and then we went into business together. The friendship, unfortunately, did not make it through. The business did really well. The friendship did not. And so that was a really tough time in my life. And I kind of swore that I would never go into business with friends again. But I do like having a partner because I have other things I do where I don't have a partner. And I like the accountability of it. I like that, if you're working with somebody, you not only are accountable to yourself, but you're accountable to that person. So when you're talking about whatever it is you're up to that week, well, next time I talk, in this case, Scott, I better have it done, whatever I said I was going to do. Whereas if you're working for yourself, those things can kind of slip by, and it's just good to bounce ideas off each other and everything. So I am someone I think that enjoys having a partner. I might leave it there though, as one partner. So with Scott and I, why did I think that this would work? And I think the difference was we were business associates first. So we were not friends initially. We worked together in a formal business setting. And that was the root of our relationship. And so I think since then we've become very close, and I consider him one of my best friends. But I think because it came from a working relationship and got to understand how he works and he got to understand how I work, that we were able to pursue a business relationship more formally, even though we had become close. So let me pause there and ask, and see if that answers part of your question, and we can go deeper on this though.
It does. So Scott, give us your version of this partnership tale. Go.
The first time I met Tim, he wasn't wearing any pants. So I'll start with that. So when I was running these stores, we used to invite inventors in to our offices to film videos where they would spotlight their invention and tell the origin story of the idea.
Okay.
So Tim and his business partner came in and they filmed this video where they were sitting behind a desk, and we were just filming kind of from torso up. And then at the end of the video, they stood up and revealed that the entire video they were doing it with just underwear on.
Yeah.
So they were just in briefs. And I don't know, it's like funny thing to say that was a moment where I was like, I like this guy. But I was like, I respect him being kind of clever here, like to take advantage of this opportunity, because it was an opportunity. You only get so many chances to kind of showcase your product to a bunch of store managers. Well, Tim's like, I'm going to do my best at this. And I was like, all right, I can respect that. That's someone that gets how to do this. And what I mean by that is sort of, it takes a scrappiness. And we both just share that sort of scrappiness, this willingness to kind of get down and dirty when it comes to building a business. And, you just even 3 weeks ago, Tim and I flew out to Pittsburgh to pitch an outdoor retailer. And we scrapped together these 70s style tennis outfits for our pitch. And we're just like, listen, we're 41 years old, and I've been in better shape, but I'm going to squeeze my body into this little tennis outfit because I know it's going to be memorable for these buyers. And so we showed up, and it was like everyone noticed us. Everyone remembered us, I'm sure. And it was just like, that's why, that's one of the things I like about Tim from like a partnership when I'm looking for perspective. I'm far enough along in my career that I've learned my shortcomings. And one of the things, I've got a very creative brain, but I guess what that tends to do is get really excited by the next shiny thing. And what a partner, and especially Tim, is good at is saying, yes, but now let's just focus. Let's focus on this thing, this task at hand. I hate meetings, and Tim's very good at like a 3 times a week meeting. We meet every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we have that opportunity to check in and be accountable to one another. And I know I'm not good at that stuff, but I know it's valuable. And so we just have this symbiotic relationship where we kind of we work well together. We fill in each other's kind of shortcomings. And I think there's just a high level of trust between the two of us that kind of, I know that I trust Tim that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And I think vice versa.
So when you say that there is this image of you 40+ year old men squeezing into tennis uniforms, and we're on a system that allows for screen sharing, I'm just wondering why it hasn't popped up at this moment.
Yeah, we will share with you photos of this. I should have worn the outfit for the.
All right, I'll do it in post. I'll do it in post.
Okay. So I say, if you can hand me it, I've got it on my screen. I'll do it.
I'll do it.
Okay.
All right. So, what was the courting period like for you guys in business? Because I think, I have learned over my now 20 years of partially being an entrepreneur, but also working in developing teams. So that's kind of where I got my start. Is that partnerships are much like marriage in the way that everyone kind of bringing what they have. They tend to hide what maybe they need to work on. Right, like, and that's the accountability part. And then there comes a time where maybe the things that you didn't cover in the beginning, they start to uncover themselves. Give you a case in point, right? Like you, Tim, you, Scott may have said, listen, we're going to go into this partnership 50-50, yada, 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 yada. And then a third partner, you decide to pick up a third partner. Well, Tim may be like, I retain my 50%. Like, I don't want this partner. Scott, you said you wanted this partner, right? So now we have to figure this thing out, right? Because it wasn't laid out in the beginning. So how was your courting process? How was it? Like, was it based in contracts? Was it based in sort of a handshake, and then you eventually got to contracts? Like, how did you court each other to ensure that not only after understanding that you might work well together, to make sure that the business was set up so that you guys could do what you do without really focusing on the logistics of the contractual obligations you had to one another?
Sure. So with both Scott and I, this is not our first rodeo. And so, and we also have, I guess you could call us serial entrepreneurs. And so we do have other side projects that we both have been involved in. And I think what's helpful with that is that it gave us a baseline of understanding organizational structure for a company and how to create that, and where ownership lies and how to divvy up ownership and things like that. And in my particular case, had raised capital before, which we've actually done for PaddleSmash. Another element that we've been talking about is the license agreement that we have with Joe. And so he has a royalty agreement with Scott and I. And so, what does that look like and how do you create that? And I think, again, fortunately, we just have experience with that. Both Scott and I actually have licensed out our own ideas to other companies. So that exists also in the world, where it doesn't always make sense for us to do our own ideas. there might be someone better suited for it, and we'll license them out. So as far as the courting process, I think we knew each other for roughly 5 years, and it was a slow burn of getting to know each other. And so I remember being in tech. I know there's a thing where like you go to hackathons, and these people show up and they'll basically like create a product over a weekend and then go into business together. And I think that's insane to do that, because like going to business together is like a marriage, like you're saying. And so I think we were fortunate in that we just casually, I don't think when we first met, we knew we were going to end up working together. It was just, it happened very naturally. And so when the time came to actually work together, it made sense. I think we knew each other well enough to know that we would make good partners. As far as the contractual stuff, again, we had both created business in the past, had lawyers that we worked with. We did make it up on the up and up. I think that was one of the shortcomings, certainly, and Scott knows this, of my original business with a friend of mine, was that utter nonsense. We didn't have an operating agreement. And the thing they say about contracts is that you only need a contract when things go bad. That's really the only reason you ever need a contract. If things are going good, you never really look at them. And we didn't have a contract, my original business partner and I. So moving forward, and Scott knew this very much so, my past situation was like, I want to have a contract that kind of lays out who's responsible for what and what our responsibilities are. And fortunately, he was fine with that. And so, I think that's it. I think experience has played a factor here in just having some situations that, we've learned what not to do. And so when setting up this arrangement and this partnership, we pulled best practices from prior experiences.
Yeah, and I think it's important, right, that that you lay out the terms with an attorney first, right? So that everyone's clear, rather than doing it when the circumstance arises, right? Because then and just to kind of speak to what I believe you're speaking about, Tim, of course, you and I haven't talked about this prior, but I had a very similar circumstance with a business partner. And what I realized is that it started to delve, this very financial, contractual relationship started delving into this emotional, I did this, I contributed this, I felt supported here, I didn't feel. I was like, listen, I love you to death, but this is about the business, and for me, I think I'm a sort of detached, emotional person. The way that in my mind, I'm like, I want to be. I'm still glad to be your friend, but I'm gonna let our attorneys figure out everything they need to figure out so that we remain friends. Because if we try to hash this out and give it to the attorneys, by the time we give it to the attorneys, we will be in a full-out feud. Rather, let them argue about it and let them call us names and say who did more and who didn't contribute more. Let them do that, and let's just go grab a whiskey at the bar and just say, hey, these knuckleheads better figure it out so that we can move on, right? And so in a way, it's beautiful when you have trusted partners like attorneys, accountants, that you can work with, that can really ensure that your business is protected for the sake of not just the business itself, but also the relationship. Scott, what's your thoughts?
Tim covered it really well. I think this is the cliche, the Mike Tyson quote that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And I think it's just we're trying to get a legally bound plan in place so that we're ready when the punches start happening. I think Tim's a bit right in that you don't ever have to worry about a contract until it's bad. But I also think you have to when it starts to go really well. When things are going really well, people can get greedy. And it's nice to just know that there's a plan in place, that there's something in place to kind of get all that sorted through. I don't personally find myself to be that way. But then again, I've never been in a spot where I've really had to face that in a big way. So I don't know, and I don't want to find that out about myself, honestly. So I would rather just have the documents in place to kind of take care of that. So that's not a stress point of the business. It's not a what happens when. We've already figured all that out. You know, we've planned for best case and we planned for worst case, and it's all laid out in paperwork.
And I think to speak to your point, Scott, it isn't just about, you know, when things fall apart, and it's not really even about, I think, maybe someone being greedy. I also think just sometimes it's clarity, right? We've scaled. What does scale mean, right? I want to share. I want to sell a portion of my share. What does that look like, right? Like, and so even in just a way, I think that just knowing what your shares are worth, what your partnership is worth, right? Just having that clarity allows for you guys not to have that conversation. It's for you, the contract and an attorney, to have that conversation, right? So much of the clarity is delegated to another person so that you guys can focus on your building your next project, on scaling what you're working on doing the things that you guys enjoy doing, and then leaving the rest to, again, a trusted advisor, right? That can help guide you in your contract or whatever your stipulations are. All right, cool.
So, I have one real quick specific thing that I kind of demand that are in contracts that I do now that I'd love to share this, that Scott and I learned about it at the same time from another person that we worked with, and it's called a shotgun clause, right, Scott?
A shootout.
Sorry, a shootout clause. Okay. And what basically a shootout clause does is it says, all right, let's say there's two partners and one partner wants out. Well, that person then needs to make an offer to purchase the business, and the other partner can either accept that offer or they need to pay more for it. Is that what it is? Am I getting this screwed up? Right. So it keeps you like very honest. Like if you're going to have this situation where you're going to split up, right? This is kind of maybe a worst case scenario.
Yep.
That what you're describing is always the hardest part, because it's like, well, what's the thing worth? Like, you know, the person who wants out is going to think it's worth a lot more than the person who's going to stay in and keep running it. And so what this clause does is that it keeps you honest, because if you want to come in and say, hey, I'm going to buy this company and I'm going to lowball you to the partner, well, the partner then has the opportunity to say, I think it's worth more than that. I'm going to accept that offer, and then it's mine. So you can't screw me by trying to lowball me an offer, right? You need to make a fair offer, and if that person accepts it, then they keep the business. If not, you get paid out. And so I just think it's a really kind of neat mechanism that you can enact in a partnership if things do fall apart.
Yeah. So the idea is, I am in business with Scott. I then decide I want out. I am then bound to make an offer, but my offer needs to be considerable and reasonable, right? Based on some level of financial analysis. And then Scott gets to make a counter offer, and basically I need to take that counter offer if my first offer was deemed to not be fair and reasonable. So in essence, I can't lowball what I will pay Scott out at. It has to be fair and reasonable. And if I intentionally lowball, then his counter offer is then what I have to pay, because then that will more than likely be deemed more fair and reasonable than what my initial offer was.
Yeah. And I think I may have missed, it's not the counter offer. He can take your offer, I think is what it is.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He could just be like, actually, if you think that's what it's worth, I'm going to buy you out.
Yeah.
and you're gone. So
which hopefully is smarter and will prevail in that way. So let's talk about the first moment, I guess, of you individually. I'll start with you, Tim, right? So You're out there in the world. You're in Walmart, Target, somewhere, and you see utter nonsense. Right?
Yep.
What's that first feeling like?
The coolest feeling in the world.
Yeah.
It is wild. It is wild. I certainly, like, once they were in stores, I rushed to them. I took photos with it. I'm sitting there doing selfies in the aisle with my game, and it's one of the coolest things I've ever experienced. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. Like, that's to have this thing that was an idea a year ago in my head now be on store shelves at, in Target specifically, like the most, premier retailer, in the country.
Yeah.
That's a pretty wild experience. The coolest thing though is if I will be like at a party or something and somebody tells me about this game that they played and they don't know who I am. And they'll be like, I played this game, it was utter nonsense. It was so cool and so much fun. That blows my mind more than seeing it at Target. When this random person I meet happens to know my game and has played it and had a fun time with it, that I gave this person, their friends, a fun time. That's the most fulfilling part of my job. Like, full stop.
Cool. All right, Scott, for you. So you guys are think tanking it. You're pitching. Maybe some of it is some of it is kind of lukewarm. Some of it's come back to us with something, right? And then you get to finally create this brain store, right? You walk into it and you're watching other people decide, like, I like this, I like that. What was that experience like for you? Just experiencing this ecosystem that you created, right? That you argued for, that you pushed for, that you curated. How was it to just be a passenger as people then started to communicate their thoughts around what was in the brainstorm?
I mean, it's a really scary process at first to put your ideas out into the world. And then it becomes very fulfilling when when it resonates the way you hope it will. You never know. You just really never know if it's going to resonate. And you don't know until people have to part with their money in exchange for the thing you made. So I've made, I think, at least 160 products in my career. And every single one of them has gone the same way. I start loving it, and then the product development process is just arduous. It takes a long time, and it's always a little painful. And so, the example here would be PaddleSmash, where we started working on this over a year ago. And we spent the last year working with an engineering firm here in the US, a factory overseas, lots and lots of refinements and development. And invariably, I fall out of love with the product. I forgot why I liked it in the first place. It happens every single time for me. And so then there is this period, there's this moment when the product finally arrives and it's in front of a person seeing it for the first time, when I remember again why I made the thing and I fall back in love with it. So it's like Tim's describing that moment of seeing it on shelf. And yes, there's that. But even better is when I'm seeing people respond to it that first time. So, I had like a great experience a week ago. I was at a local sporting goods store. They'd invited me as a local inventor into their shops to demonstrate PaddleSmash. And I'm demonstrating, trying to get people to come over. People are responding, and I'm having a ton of fun. It's great. So this couple comes up. They start watching me play. They start playing, enjoying it. And they're like, this is awesome. And I'm like, great. I'm glad you love it. I love it too. Like, I'm glad to see you respond. And they're like, how did you end up here? Like, why are you making this thing? Like, do you make toys and games for a living? And so I start telling them my story, and I tell them, most of the time when I tell people the story about marbles, most people in Utah have never heard of it, but people always say, all right, well, tell me your story. So I tell them about marbles. I tell these guys about marbles, and they're like, we love marbles. We lived in New York. We loved that store. And I was like, well, that's awesome. Like that makes me feel great. And then they're like, what's a game you've made? Well, I've made a lot of stuff, but honestly, none of the stuff I've made has made it big yet. You know, it's been all kind of like singles and doubles, no home runs yet. So I'm always a little hesitant to tell people what I've made because people are like, never played that. But I was like, all right, I'll tell you one that I made, that I helped make. And I told them about this game, O-Trio, that I was a part of. And they were like, O-Trio is our favorite game. It's literally on our coffee table right now. It's our favorite game in the world. And I'm like, God sent me you two to help me feel good about what I'm doing. I need these moments. It's honestly the nourishment that keeps me going, is seeing people respond to and enjoy the things I make.
Tim, good job with the paid actors. It worked off for you. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, I'm going to my last question. My last question is going to be, how does each of those experiences compare to now seeing people engage with PaddleSmash? Like, so you've had your own experiences where you got to see someone, see your utter nonsense on a shelf, heard people talk about it. You've seen the experience in the Marbles Brain store. How does it now feel to just witness people or playing with people that may not know that this is a part of your brainchild? How is that compared? How is it different? How is it similar to the experiences that you had with the previous games that you had created?
So for me personally, it's not like I'm sitting here knocking home runs out of the park. I've had a few failed things that I've done in between now and utter nonsense. And so to me, like you really start to second guess yourself. Am I good at this? Am I doing the right thing? Should I change my career path? And so I would say it's very similar for me, right? So at this point we're just getting started, but I can tell you right now, like this thing is already doing well. I mean, we've mentioned it, we've introduced it to a couple of retailers. Everyone so far has said yes. We've been playtesting it repeatedly, hours and hours. Everyone's loving it. So it just feels like, I was like, oh, I've been here before a little bit, I was like, I remember what this is like.
Yeah.
And it feels really good. And so, I mean, it's pretty much there. Like I feel those same initial bits of excitement, and it's just they're little bits though, right? It's not like there's something that happens where it's this like aha moment, I've arrived.
Yep.
It's just like stepping stones of success. And like the first one was like, we had somebody that we didn't know bought our product from our website, right? Like, cause we tell our friends and family, hey, we're doing this, and they're going to be supportive. But to have that first random individual who knows nothing about Scott and I just see what we put out in the world and be like, I want that. Here is my hard-earned money for that product.
Yep.
Like telling you, Scott, like giddy school children. I mean, it's just like, what just happened? This is amazing. Somebody bought our game, because you never really know. You never really know if it's going to sell, if everybody's going to like it.
So then let me ask you this. This is my final question. Now, I want each of you, right? And you give no reason why. You just tell the answer, right? Just tell the answer, and then I'm going to ask the audience as a later question what they think about it. Tim, other than the games that you have created, what is your favorite board game?
You're going to think I'm lying, but it's O-Trio.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay, cool. I'm gonna ask people in the comments, have they ever played it and what they think about it. All right, Scott, other than any game that you have created, what's your favorite board game?
And I can't explain why. I just have to say the answer.
No. This is what the comments will do in the YouTube space, right? I want them to talk about what their feelings are about it.
So I have very specific reasons for this, but my favorite game of all time is Trivial Pursuit.
Trivial Pursuit. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So listen, when this episode airs and when it drops, I will invite you guys. I'll send you guys the link. Then you can engage in why you came up with why the game is, and that'll help the conversation go, right? People listening to you explain why is one thing. That creates debate. Them just getting an opportunity to talk about their own experiences and you being able to hop in the comments and say, this is why I love the game, I think creates like such healthy, awesome conversation. All right, cool. Well, listen, guys, it's been fun. Did you have fun?
Yeah, great time.
Yeah?
Loved
All right, cool. So what I'd like for you to do is I'm right now interested in purchasing PaddleSmash. I want to buy it right now while it's still fall. I'm in New York. I'm in Oklahoma. I'm in DC. Where am I going?
Yeah, go to paddlesmash.com. That's the easiest. Although we also now, as of yesterday, have an Amazon listing as well. So you can find us on Amazon. This is like going back to Tim's point. Like we literally are sharing screen grabs of every sale we get still. Like we celebrate every sale. We say thank you to everyone that makes a purchase. But yeah, so paddlesmash.com or Amazon are the ways to get it now. But also we are going into retail, and we will be in Dick's Sporting Goods starting this fall. And then we'll be in Shields locations starting this next spring, among others. But those are the two biggest right now. So we'll be in retail locations as well, hopefully near most people.
All right, cool, guys. Well, listen, this is Man vs. Brand. I'm Dion Brown. I appreciate Scott Brown, possible relation. I'll look that up in our country. And Tim Swindle for being guests on the Man vs. Brand podcast. Hope you guys learned about partnerships, but also about going forward with concepts that you believe in, right? Sometimes it's not just about doing the thing that you believe will make you money, but doing the thing that you, in fact, believe in yourself. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you guys for always listening and watching. I appreciate everyone. Have a great one. Bye.
Thanks.